Before we tackle the Massachusetts Salem Witch Trials that took place in 1692, let's look back at the European history behind witch hunts, persecutions, and burnings with Scott Rank of the History Unplugged podcast.
At the height of the witch-burning craze in Europe, thousands of people, largely women, were falsely accused of witchcraft. Many of them were burned, hanged, and executed, typically under religious pretense. But this phenomena largely didn't happen in the Middle Ages. We look at the phenomena of witch burnings and debunk this bit of common knowledge about the Middle Ages that it was really something that happened during the Renaissance, and more so in the Enlightenment period of the 18th century. Although executions by being burnt in the stake were somewhat common in the Middle Ages, they weren't used on so-called witches. They were only on heretics and other disobeyers of Catholic teachings. Witch trials and their accusations of weather manipulation, transforming into animals, and child sacrifice have no documented occurrence before 1400 and happened more in the 16 and 1700s. So why was this event that's often linked to the Middle Ages really an event that happened during the Enlightenment?
Counterintuitive facts about the Middle Ages. Probably everyone associates with the Middle Ages. That is, let's first talk about witch burnings. And that's because whenever someone uses the phrase witch burning or witch hunt, they usually can't help but tag on the words of the Middle Ages. A book or film about the Middle Ages, and I'm talking fiction or fictionalized history, usually includes a throwaway line about witches being burned by the Catholic Church, usually in the course of the Spanish Inquisition. And the idea is that if anyone who does anything vaguely unusual is usually accused of witchcraft by a cantankerous priest, particularly if they're young, female, and too independently minded. Now, it is true that the witch-burning craze happened, and there definitely were thousands of people, largely women, who were accused of being witches. Many of them were burned, hanged, and executed, and this typically happened under religious pretense. So, this common knowledge, most of it is actually correct so far. But the problem is that it largely didn't happen in the Middle Ages. It actually happened much later, in what most people refer to as the Renaissance and the Enlightenment, the time period when we think we're getting over this bigotry and superstition and terrible things that we associate with the Middle Ages. This was the early modern period from the 1500s to the 1700s. Executions by being burnt at the stake were somewhat common in the Middle Ages. They weren't used on so-called witches. They were only used on heretics and other disobeyers of Catholic teachings who were thought to be worthy of receiving this death. Witch trials and their accusations of weather manipulation and transformation into animals and child sacrifices have no documented occurrence before the 1400s, and claims that these happened in the 1200s have been found to be modern-day forgeries. So let me just give some overview here first, and then we'll dig down into the details on how witch trials actually start up and what people thought of witchcraft in the Middle Ages themselves. For most of the Middle Ages, till the years following the Black Plague of the 1300s, the official teaching of the Catholic Church was that witches didn't exist. If a peasant accused anyone of witchcraft, a priest would probably respond by rolling his eyes and thinking, "Ugh, my ignorant peasant parishioners. Don't be ridiculous, that's a superstition. There are no witches." There are actually medieval canons of the church that declare anyone who believes in the existence of women who fly through the sky on broomsticks and cause infants to die and make harvests to fail to be a fool. The belief in witchcraft was declared a defiance of church teachings on the supernatural. To understand belief in witches, we have to look at how medievals understood magic, the manipulation of nature. Almost everyone in the Middle Ages did believe that it existed, from a peasant up to the Pope. That's not because of ignorant superstition, but it's because almost everyone understood the boundaries between the natural and the spiritual to be porous. After all, any practicing Catholic regularly celebrated the Eucharist, a celebration in which bread and wine became imbued with the Spirit of Christ. And if you are a natural philosopher, which is the medieval term for a scientist, the most cutting-edge research was done in the field of alchemy. We think of this as people with Merlin wizard hats trying to turn lead into gold. But alchemy was more than that. Yes, there were attempts to create gold, but alchemy refers to a wide-ranging field of research in which people sought to transform lowly substances into higher substances. This was a research area that tried to unite the natural philosophies with the abstract philosophies. So it was sort of like the early attempts of grand unified theory that particle physicists talk of today. The origins of chemistry as a science actually owe their roots to alchemy. Sir Isaac Newton himself practiced alchemy. It was a very highly technical field, and researchers were using the wisdom of the day. A lot of it was incorrect, as we found out later, but they had no way to know that because they didn't have centuries of research to build upon to know that what they were doing wouldn't necessarily work. A 13th century French priest and bishop, William of Auvergne, condemned most magic as being false or superstitious, but he admitted that some works of natural magic should be viewed as a branch of the natural philosophies as long as the practitioners did not use it for the purposes of evil. Seal skins, for example, could be used as a charm to repel lightning. Vulture parts could be used for protection. Gardeners could use virgins to plant olive trees since their pure state would promote their growth. When doctors wanted an accurate prognosis from their patient, they placed the herb vervain on their patient's hand because it was thought to cause him or her to speak their fate truthfully. True serum. Religious stories were also blended with the magic. According to one medical treatise, wool soaked in olive oil from the Mount of Olives in the Holy Land could staunch blood when mixed with a spoken story about a man healed of his blindness by the blood of Jesus. And medical prescriptions such as these from respected doctors meant that in the Middle Ages, magic was not imagined to be essentially female. So you couldn't exclusively mix in witch trials with being anti-female because the two weren't correlated with each other. According to 14th century court records, the majority of those accused and tried for dark magic or sorcery, or maleficium, were men. This was because texts on magic required skill, learning, preparation, and a smattering of education to go through, which was far more available to men than women. Most heretics were tried for necromancy, conjuring the dead and making them perform feats of illusion and revealing the secrets of the universe. But the books that described necromancy were written in complex Latin, a language taught at primary schools that were, with very few exceptions, exclusively male. Until the 14th century, the church rebuked Christians who believed in witches. In fact, various medical law codes declared belief in the existence of witches to be outlawed rather than the practice of witchcraft itself. One churchman was so exasperated with a village that genuinely believed the claims of a woman to be a witch that he took a direct approach to solve it. When she said that she could turn herself into a puff of smoke and leave a locked room through a keyhole, the clergy locked himself in a room with her and told her to escape through a keyhole by striking her with a stick. Well, she wasn't able to escape, and the villagers stopped believing in her. The first case we see of a witch trial was in 1419. When the word hexere, or witchcraft, was first used in a trial in Valais. In 1431, at the trial of Joan of Arc, she was also accused of witchcraft, along with many other fabricated crimes. But the connection between women and dark magic didn't become more explicit until the 1487 publication of Heinrich Krame's Malleus Maleficarum, or Hammer of Witches. 1487 is well into the Renaissance period and the beginning of the Age of Discovery. People define the end of the Middle Ages differently. Some mark it at 1453, the conquest of Constantinople. Some mark it at 1500, some mark it in the 1540s. But this is not a time period that people would associate mostly with the Middle Ages. Well, Kramer warned in his book that women's spiritual weakness and natural proclivity for evil made them particularly susceptible to the temptations of the devil. He believed that all witchcraft comes from carnal lust and that women's uncontrolled sexuality made them culprits of any sinister workings going on. So these are hardly progressive ideas, to be sure, but why didn't these ideas come out in earlier centuries? Why not in the 1200s or the 1100s, the High Middle Ages? Was there a social change happening in the 15th century that linked the feminine with dark uses of magic? The increased emphasis on women in witchcraft largely had to do with the shift in the perception of magic. Earlier churchmen didn't believe dark magic to be real and condemned anyone who practiced it. The 10th century canon, Episcope, described women who believed they could fly on the backs of certain beasts in the middle of the night alongside the Greek goddess Diana because they had been seduced by illusions from the devil. The canon described these women as stupid and foolish for being tricked rather than practicing any sort of dangerous dark art. But in later centuries, as we head up into the Renaissance, other works were written at the same time using scientific terminology to prove the existence of witches. They describe the dangers of witchcraft to society and the ways in which it should be dealt. Witch hunts slowly received endorsement from the church and state, but the witch-burning craze didn't reach full hysteria until the years between 1560 and 1630.
Check out the YouTube version of this episode, which has accompanying images. I'm Mark Vinette, and I hope you're enjoying the ride.